In the dim, smoke-filled back room of a nondescript Ottawa office building, on a crisp autumn morning in 1942, Clara Mackenzie hunched over her battered Underwood typewriter, her fingers flying across the keys with the frantic rhythm of a Morse code operator. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and machine oil, punctuated by the distant hum of military trucks rumbling through the capital's streets. As a junior secretary in the shadowy Canadian Signals Intelligence Branch, affectionately dubbed the Farm by those in the know, Clara was one of the unsung cogs in the Allied war machine, transcribing intercepted messages from the Pacific Theater. That day, the intercepts had poured in faster than usual, fragments of Japanese naval chatter crackling over the ether from listening posts in British Columbia. Her heart pounded as she decoded the latest batch, the words blurring under the strain of a 16-hour shift. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed through the room. The typewriter ribbon tore clean in half, spilling inky tendrils across the platen like spilled blood. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. In that instant, as she peeled back the ruined strip, a pattern emerged, garbled kanji symbols aligning into something coherent, a blueprint of Japan's audacious thrust toward Midway Atoll. Fear gripped her. This wasn't just another routine decrypt. If she was right, it outlined a carrier strike force poised to cripple the American fleet, and Canada, with its vast Pacific coastline, would feel the ripples. The danger was immediate, the mission clear. Get this to the brass before the rising sun's shadow fell too far. Clara's hands trembled as she gathered the torn ribbon, stuffing it into her skirt pocket, while glancing over her shoulder at the cluster of male analysts huddled around a radio set. Born in Halifax to a fisherman father who'd lost his trawler to a U-boat the year before, Clara had joined the Women's Division of the Royal Canadian Air Force not for glory, but to avenge the quiet losses that war inflicted on families like hers. At 24, with her sharp green eyes and auburn hair pinned back under a utilitarian scarf, she was the epitome of the overlooked home front hero, far from the front lines, yet closer to the war's hidden veins than most soldiers. Her unit, a modest detachment under the auspices of the British-Canadian Ultra program, sifted through Enigma echoes and Japanese purple cipher scraps, feeding intel to the Americans via secure channels. Comrades like Sergeant Liam Thompson, a lanky Quebecois with a perpetual cigarette dangling from his lips, and Corporal Ethan Campbell, the stoic maritime veteran who double-checked her typings, formed her wartime family. Liam, with his quick wit masking a deep-seated worry for his brothers in the RCAF squadrons over Europe, often teased her about her witch's intuition for spotting anomalies. Ethan, quieter, shared stories of his Nova Scotia roots during smoke breaks, forging bonds that made the endless nights bearable. But today, as the office buzzed with urgency, whispers of a massive Japanese fleet mobilizing, Clara felt the weight of isolation. Canada's entry into the war had been reluctant, a dutiful extension of empire loyalty, yet here they were, entangled in the Pacific maelstrom. The Battle of the Atlantic had hardened them, but Japan's expansionist fury threatened to drag the Dominion into uncharted waters. Why were they in this fight? Not just for Britain or the Yanks, but for the fragile peace of their own shores, where ration cards and blackout drills were daily reminders of vulnerability. As Liam barked orders to fetch more intercepts, Clara sensed the rising tension, a storm cloud gathering that promised to upend everything. The office, buried in the sub-basement of a repurposed government warehouse on Sussex Drive, thrummed with the low whine of teleprinters and the clack of heels on linoleum as more staff filtered in for the graveyard shift. Clara smoothed her uniform skirt, steeling herself against the knot of dread in her stomach. The intercepts had started trickling in weeks earlier, cryptic references to Operation MI, a feint toward the Aleutians to mask a hammer blow at Midway. Canada's role was peripheral but vital. Their listening stations at Shelter Point and Cole Harbour picked up signals that American stations missed, bounced off the Northern Aurora. Clara's boss, Major Daniel Roberts, a stern Toronto lawyer turned spymaster, paced the room, his pipe clenched between teeth yellowed from chain smoking. "Mackenzie, what have you got?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the din. She hesitated, the torn ribbon burning against her thigh like a guilty secret, explaining why Canada was knee-deep in this, decades of imperial ties. The shared peril of fascism's spread felt futile amid the chaos. Her comrades embodied that resolve. Liam, who'd enlisted after Pearl Harbor to even the score for the Pacific Boys, and Ethan, whose cousin sailed with the RCN's HMCS Ottawa, sunk off the Azores. Emotional threads wove them together, Liam's flirtatious banter lightening Ethan's brooding silences, Clara's quiet encouragement reminding them of the home front stake. Yet, as she relayed the partial decrypt, piecing together carrier designations like Akagi and Kaga, a pall settled over the group. Something terrible loomed. If Japan seized Midway, supply lines to Alaska, Canada's backyard, would snap, inviting invasion fears along the Yukon border. The feeling was visceral, a premonition of catastrophe. Whispers of betrayal filtered in too, rumors of a Japanese spy ring in Vancouver's Japanese-Canadian community, fueling paranoia. Clara's mind raced. Her discovery could shift the tide, but voicing it meant risking accusations of hysteria from the old guard who dismissed girls' hunches. As the clock ticked past midnight, the major problem erupted like a depth charge in still waters. Clara spread the inked ribbon fragments across her desk, illuminated by the harsh glow of a desk lamp, her pulse thundering in her ears. The aligned symbols revealed not just positions, but timings. A dawn strike by 4 carriers, their air wings primed to obliterate U.S. defenses in 5 brutal hours. Confusion reigned. Liam snatched the ribbon, his face paling as he cross-referenced it against codebooks. "Mon Dieu, it's the full plan," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. Ethan leaned in, his calloused hand steadying the table, but his eyes betrayed raw fear. The fear of a man who'd seen friends vanish in Atlantic convoys. An ambush of sorts unfolded internally, the office's secure line to Washington jammed. Possibly sabotage, leaving them isolated. Clara's hard decision crystallized, bypass protocol and courier the intel herself to the American embassy. A half-hour dash through blackout-shrouded streets. But suffering clawed at her. Visions of her father's watery grave flashed, mingling with the agony of doubt. What if she was wrong? Real fear of death. Not her own, but the collective doom of thousands, suffused the air. Suspense peaked as shouts echoed from the hallway. An unauthorized intruder spotted near the perimeter, perhaps a 5th columnist. Liam grabbed his sidearm, barking at Ethan to secure the doors, while Clara clutched the ribbon, her mind a whirlwind of pain and resolve. The war's brutality stripped away illusions. Comrades who joked hours ago now stared into the abyss, bonds tested by the specter of failure. Outside, a siren wailed, amplifying the chaos. Was it a drill, or the first harbinger of broader assault? Clara's breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of sacrifice pressing down, every second stretching into eternity as she prepared to run. In the climax shadow, as Clara slipped toward the back exit with the precious ribbon tucked into a sealed envelope, the peak threat materialized with explosive fury. A sudden blackout plunged the office into inky darkness, followed by the crash of shattering glass, guards tackling the intruder in the corridor, his cries muffled by fists. Chaos reigned. Teleprinters screeched to a halt, and Liam fired a warning shot that ricocheted off metal filing cabinets, the acrid smell of gunpowder mingling with fear sweat. Ethan's voice cut through, hoarse and urgent. "Mackenzie, go. I'll cover." But the last chance teetered on a knife's edge. The intruder's accomplice, a shadowy figure in the gloom, lunged for her desk, scattering papers in a bid to destroy evidence. Clara dodged, her skirt tearing on a jagged drawer, heart slamming against her ribs as she vaulted toward the door. If you're still here with her in this moment, subscribe, so their courage lives on. The unexpected turn hit like a torpedo. Amid the scuffle, the intruder's dropped satchel spilled documents revealing a deeper conspiracy. Japanese agents embedded in Ottawa's diplomatic circles, feeding false trails to mislead Allied codebreakers. Clara burst into the night, the cool October air slapping her face, but the revelation hung heavy. Her torn ribbon hadn't just decoded a plan, it had unraveled a web threatening the entire war effort. Dodging patrols under the faint moonlight, she raced toward the embassy. The fate of 4 carriers, and perhaps the Pacific, balanced on her solitary sprint. Clara's footsteps echoed sharply against the cobblestone streets of Ottawa, her breath ragged in the chill autumn night as she clutched the sealed envelope to her chest. The blackout enforced a suffocating darkness, broken only by the occasional sweep of a warden's flashlight probing for violations, and she darted from shadow to shadow, heart hammering like the engines of a destroyer under fire. The revelation from the intruder's satchel burned in her mind, a network of Japanese diplomats and turncoats in the capital, feeding disinformation to sow chaos in Allied intelligence circles. It explained the jammed lines, the sudden influx of false intercepts designed to blind the Americans to the true Midway threat. Major Roberts had always preached caution, his Toronto pragmatism a bulwark against panic, but this was no mere espionage. It was a dagger aimed at the heart of the Pacific Campaign. As she rounded the corner onto Elgin Street, a patrol jeep rumbled past, its headlights cutting brief swaths through the gloom, forcing her to flatten against a brick wall slick with dew. Liam and Ethan's faces flashed in her thoughts, Liam's defiant grin as he wrestled the intruder, Ethan's steady hand on his pistol, comrades who'd bought her this slim window with their own peril. Canada's entanglement in this web stemmed from its geographic curse, the vast, undefended Pacific frontier, where Japanese submarines prowled like wolves, and the Aleutian Feint could easily spill over into Alaskan waters, dragging the Dominion into direct confrontation. The emotional tether between them all tightened in her chest. She'd shared Ethan's quiet vigils over code sheets, laughing off Liam's jokes about her Halifax fire, forging a makeshift family amid the war's grind. Yet rising tension coiled like a spring. Sirens wailed in the distance, perhaps air raid drills or something more sinister, and Clara wondered if the spies had already mobilized to silence her. The embassy loomed ahead, its iron gates a beacon in the murk, but every step amplified the dread. If she failed, 4 carriers would unleash hell on Midway, and the ripples would drown Canadian ports from Vancouver to Halifax. Inside the American embassy's dimly lit foyer, after a frantic pounding on the service door that summoned a bleary-eyed Marine guard, Clara thrust the envelope forward, her voice a hoarse whisper as she spilled the tale of the torn ribbon and the spilled satchel. The guard, a burly sergeant from Ohio with a drawl thick as molasses, escorted her to a secure cipher room where Ambassador Ray Atherton himself emerged from a late-night briefing, his pinstripe suit rumpled and eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Mackenzie, this is dynamite," he murmured after scanning the aligned kanji fragments and the pilfered documents, which detailed not just the carrier strike, but the spy ring's role in fabricating Aleutian diversions to split U.S. forces. Canada's vital contribution, its northern listening posts capturing faint signals the Yanks' Pearl Harbor station overlooked, suddenly crystallized in Atherton's mind, a reminder of the Dominion's understated might in the shadows of war. He wired Admiral Nimitz immediately via the hotline, bypassing jammed channels with a diplomatic override, while Clara slumped into a chair, the adrenaline ebbing to reveal tremors in her hands. Back at the farm, the rising tension had escalated into outright pandemonium. Liam, nursing a split lip from the scuffle, coordinated with Ethan to sweep the office for bugs, their bond a lifeline in the frenzy. Liam's Quebecois fire fueled his resolve. He'd lost an uncle to the Great War's trenches, vowing never to let betrayal claim another. But Ethan's maritime stoicism masked a deeper fear, his cousin's ship a ghost in his nightmares. Emotional connections frayed under the strain. Clara's absence left a void, her intuition the glue holding their decrypts together, and whispers of internment camps for Japanese Canadians in British Columbia added a bitter layer of national shame. Why was Canada in this Pacific quagmire? Loyalty to the Crown had pulled them in after Pearl Harbor, but the real hook was self-preservation. The Japanese Empire's hunger for resources eyed the timber and minerals of the West Coast, turning homefront clerks into unwitting warriors. As Atherton paced, dictating addendums to the wire, Clara felt the storm building. Nimitz's response crackled back within the hour, confirming the intel's authenticity and mobilizing Task Force 17. Yet the tension mounted. Reports trickled in of a second intruder evading capture, slinking toward the Rideau Canal, and Clara's mind raced with the what-ifs. If the spies reached their handlers first, the carrier's dawn raid would proceed unchecked. The major problem deepened as dawn crept over the Ottawa River, painting the sky in reluctant hues of pink and gray, and Clara returned to the farm under armed escort, only to find the office a hive of controlled chaos. Major Roberts, his pipe forgotten in an ashtray overflowing with butts, grilled her on every detail, his stern facade cracking to reveal a flicker of paternal pride for the young secretary who'd upended protocol. The suffering hit hard. Liam slumped against a filing cabinet, a makeshift bandage on his knuckles from subduing the first spy, his usual banter silenced by the grim reality of near-miss sabotage. Ethan, ever the rock, inventoried the scattered papers, but his eyes, haunted by visions of convoy losses, betrayed the toll. He'd confided in Clara once about the guilt of surviving while others sank, and now that guilt resurfaced, amplified by the close call. Confusion swirled as additional intercepts flooded in, confirming the 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steaming full tilt toward Midway, their decks swarming with Zero fighters primed for annihilation. The hard decision loomed for Roberts. Alert the RCMP to round up the spy ring, risking diplomatic fallout with neutral-leaning Japanese envoys, or hold back and let the Americans handle the strike alone. Clara advocated fiercely, her voice steady despite the ache in her torn skirt and the phantom burn of the ribbon's ink on her fingers, arguing that Canada's stake demanded action, Vancouver's harbors, Halifax shipyards, all vulnerable if Midway fell. Real fear of death permeated the room, not just for sailors on the high seas, but for the home front. Rumors of U-boat sightings off Newfoundland heightened the paranoia, and Clara's own loss, her father's trawler, a statistic in the Atlantic graveyard, fueled her resolve. Suspense ratcheted to a fever pitch as a teletype chattered urgently. Nimitz had laid the ambush, U.S. carriers Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet positioned in wait, but the spy's false trails had nearly delayed the trap. Liam cracked a weak joke about Clara's ribbon being worth more than gold, lightening the air momentarily, yet the bonds between them strained under the weight. Ethan's quiet nod of thanks to Clara spoke volumes, a silent pact forged in shared terror. Outside, the city stirred to life, blackout lamps flickering off, oblivious to the invisible war Clara had just tipped. The suffering etched lines on their faces, a microcosm of the war's grind. Sacrifices unseen, decisions that could sink empires or save them, all hinging on a secretary's torn strip of ink. In the Resolution's fragile dawn, as radio operators at Pearl Harbor relayed the battle's unfolding fury, the conflict crested not in Ottawa's basements, but across the Pacific's vast expanse. Nimitz's dive bombers, guided by Clara's decoded timings, struck with surgical precision at 10:25 a.m. Local time, the Akagi erupting in flames from a 1,000-pound bomb that tore through her flight deck, her sister ships Kaga and Soryu following in rapid succession as American dauntlesses rained hell from the clouds. Hiryu, the last holdout, launched a desperate counter but succumbed within hours, her hull listing under torpedo hits from devastation TBDs. 4 carriers sunk in 5 hours, a cataclysmic blow to Japan's naval might, the turning point Clara's ribbon had illuminated. Back in the farm, the teletype's triumphant clatter brought weary cheers. Liam whooped, clapping Ethan on the back, while Roberts allowed a rare smile, promoting Clara on the spot to lead analyst. But who was lost? The intruder Liam had downed perished in custody. A Vancouver-based operative with ties to the Japanese consulate, his death a grim necessity that haunted the sergeant. Ethan survived unscathed physically, though the war's shadow deepened his silences. Clara endured, her hands steadied by purpose, yet the emotional consequences lingered like smoke, elation soured by the knowledge of airmen on both sides plummeting into the sea. Families shattered from Halifax to Tokyo. Bitter realism settled in. Canada's victory was borrowed, its Pacific shores safe for now, but the spy ring's remnants, 2 diplomats vanishing into the ether, promised reprisals. Somber reflection filled the room as they sipped lukewarm tea, Roberts toasting to the unsung, acknowledging the war's cost on souls like Clara's, forever altered by a moment's intuition. The surprising end came as Clara sifted through the intruder's satchel remnants later that afternoon, unearthing a coded missive hinting at a larger plot, a planned sabotage of Canadian radar stations along the Yukon, tied to a rogue element within the RCN itself. Who was the missing link, the turncoat officer pulling strings from Victoria? As the sun dipped low over Parliament Hill, casting long shadows across the Ottawa streets, Clara folded the note away, her green eyes narrowing with renewed determination, wondering if her torn ribbon had only begun to unravel the war's hidden threads. Clara's discovery of the coded missive in the intruder's satchel sent ripples through the farm like a stone skipped across the Ottawa River, pulling her deeper into a labyrinth of shadows that extended far beyond the Pacific decrypts. By midday, with the teletype still humming reports of the Midway triumph, smoke plumes rising from the Akagi's funeral pyre visible in reconnaissance photos wired from Hawaii, the major problem morphed into something insidious, a domestic serpent coiled within Canada's wartime sinews. Major Roberts convened an emergency huddle in the sub-basement's briefing room, the air stale with the residue of last night's gunpowder and unwashed urgency. Liam Thompson, his split lip scabbed over and eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, paced like a caged wolf, while Ethan Campbell methodically sorted the satchel's contents under the flicker of a bare bulb. The missive, penned in a cipher that mimicked RCN signal formats, alluded to Operation Shadowpine, a sabotage scheme targeting radar installations along the Yukon coast, vital eyes watching for Japanese incursions from the Aleutians. Confusion gripped them. Who within the Royal Canadian Navy could orchestrate such treason? Clara, her auburn hair disheveled and uniform still bearing the tear from her midnight dash, traced the kanji-like flourishes with a pencil, her green eyes narrowing as patterns emerged. References to a Victoria contact, a high-ranking officer with access to convoy routes. The suffering was immediate and personal. Liam slammed a fist on the table, cursing in French-tinged English about betrayers who spat on his brother's graves in the Atlantic, his Quebecois heritage fueling a rage born of family losses to U-boats. Ethan, the stoic maritimer, gripped the table's edge until his knuckles whitened, haunted by his cousin sinking on the HMCS Ottawa. This plot threatened to unravel the fragile security of home-front ports, where his own kin still fished treacherous waters. Hard decisions loomed: alert naval command and risk exposing the farm's sources, or pursue quietly, endangering more lives in the shadows. Real fear of death permeated the room, not the abstract peril of distant battles, but the chilling proximity of a knife in the dark, with Japanese submarines already probing Vancouver's approaches. Suspense built as Roberts dispatched a runner to RCMP headquarters, the weight of isolation pressing down. Canada's peripheral role in the Pacific now felt like a bullseye, its vast northern frontier a sieve against espionage. Clara felt the bonds straining, Liam's protective glances her way, Ethan's silent nod of reliance. Yet the war's grind etched deeper lines, turning comrades into sentinels in their own land. As afternoon bled into evening, the rising tension escalated into a clandestine operation that thrust Clara into uncharted territory, far from the safety of her typewriter. Roberts, his pipe reignited and voice gravelly from barked orders, assigned her and Liam to infiltrate a suspected safe house in Ottawa's Byward Market District, a warren of dimly lit taverns and boarding houses teeming with transients and veiled spies. Ethan stayed behind to cross-reference the missive against RCN rosters, his maritime diligence an anchor amid the storm. But the separation gnawed at Clara. Their shared smoke breaks, where he'd recount tales of Nova Scotia fogbanks hiding enemy periscopes, had become her touchstone of normalcy. Why was Canada ensnared in this web? The Dominion's loyalty to the Allies had evolved into a strategic linchpin, its radar chain, codenamed Pine Tree, stretched from Newfoundland to the Yukon, an invisible shield forged in the fires of the Battle of the Atlantic, and now pivotal against Japan's northern ambitions. Emotional connections frayed under the duress. Liam, ever the quick-witted Quebecois, masked his anxiety with banter as they slipped into civilian coats. But Clara caught the tremor in his hand when he checked his concealed Webley revolver. "For the boys at sea," he muttered, echoing the creed that bound them, a reminder of the sacrifices that made their quiet heroism possible. The feeling that something terrible was coming crystallized as they navigated the market's cobblestone alleys, the scent of fresh-baked bread from rationed ovens clashing with the undercurrent of fishmongers' stalls masking illicit dealings. Paranoia bloomed. Every shadowed doorway hid a potential fifth columnist, every glance from a bundled pedestrian, a probe. Clara's mind raced with the missive's implications. Sabotaged radars could blind patrols, inviting Japanese carriers, survivors of Midway's carnage, to strike at Alaskan oil fields, spilling over into Canadian territory like ink from her torn ribbon. The air grew thick with unspoken dread. Liam's stories of his RCAF kin dodging Luftwaffe flak over Dieppe surfaced in halting whispers, forging a deeper pact between them. As they approached the safe house, a nondescript tenement above a shuttered print shop, a flicker of movement in an upstairs window spiked the suspense. Had the Victoria contact been tipped off? Clara's heart pounded, the war's distant thunder now rumbling at her doorstep, every step a gamble in the gathering dusk. The major problem detonated in the safe house's cramped attic, where dust motes danced in the beam of Liam's pilfered flashlight, revealing crates of forged RCN documents and a shortwave radio tuned to Japanese frequencies. Clara's breath caught as she rifled through a ledger, her fingers smudging with coal dust from the hidden bunker-like space, uncovering names. Lieutenant Commander Noah Walker, a Victoria-based officer with unexplained absences, linked to the spy ring via payments funneled through Vancouver's Japanese-Canadian internment camps, a bitter exploitation of divided loyalties amid the government's forced relocations. Suffering clawed deep. Liam uncovered a map marked with Yukon radar sites, explosive charges sketched for midnight drops by submarine-launched scouts, and his face twisted in anguish, thinking of his uncle's trench-scarred letters from Vimy Ridge, now echoed in this homegrown betrayal. These bastards would sell us out for what? Yen? He growled, the hard decision hitting like a gut punch. Confront the network now, or shadow walker to the source, risking the entire Pine Tree line. Confusion reigned as a floorboard creaked below. Ethan radioed in via secure walkie-talkie, his voice crackling with urgency, warning of RCMP chatter about a mole in naval intelligence, but the line cut abruptly, amplifying the isolation. Clara's resolve hardened amid the fear. Visions of her father's trawler vanishing into Atlantic swells fueled her, the real terror of death now tangible. Not for her, but for the radar operators manning frozen outposts, young Canadians like her who'd traded school books for binoculars against the northern night. Suspense peaked as shadows shifted. The accomplice from the farm scuffle, a wiry operative named Samuel Hughes, burst from a concealed panel, lunging with a garrote wire glinting in the low light. Liam tackled him, the scuffle a whirlwind of grunts and thuds, furniture splintering under their weight, while Clara dodged to the radio, smashing it with a chair leg to silence any distress call. Bonds tested to breaking, Liam's shout of, "Run, Mackenzie!" bought her seconds, his loyalty a shield forged in the farm's endless nights. Outside, patrol cars wailed in the distance, the chaos mirroring the war's global frenzy, every breath a defiance against the abyss. In the climax vice, as Clara and Liam subdued Hughes amid the attic's wreckage, his wrists bound with electrical cord from the ruined radio, the peak threat erupted with a ferocity that blurred the line between home front and front line. A hidden alarm triggered, summoning reinforcements. 2 more agents, burly shadows slipping through the tenement's back stairwell, their silenced pistols coughing lead into the gloom. Chaos exploded. Bullets whizzed past Clara's ear, embedding in the ledger-strewn floor, as Liam returned fire, his Webley barking defiance and dropping one assailant in a heap. Ethan's backup arrived just in time, crashing through the front door with RCMP reinforcements, his maritime steadiness turning the tide as he wrestled the second intruder to the ground, face set in grim determination. The last chance hinged on Clara snatching the map and missive remnants, stuffing them into her coat as the room filled with cordite smoke and shouts. If you're still here with her in this moment, subscribe, so their courage lives on. The unexpected turn sliced through the melee. Hughes, gasping under Liam's knee, spat a confession. The Victoria contact, Noah Walker, wasn't just a turncoat but a double agent, feeding disinformation to the Japanese while loyal to the Allies. His sabotage, a ruse to draw out the ring's leaders embedded in Ottawa's diplomatic corps. Revelation dawned amid the pandemonium. Walker's absences masked covert meetings with MI6 handlers, the Yukon plot a bait to ensnare the real threat, a Japanese attaché posing as a trade envoy. Clara's pulse thundered as she relayed the intel to Roberts via a field phone Ethan had jury-rigged, the explosive twist upending their assumptions. Her torn ribbon had ignited a chain reaction, not just sinking carriers, but flushing spies from Canadian shadows. The scuffle subsided with the agents in cuffs, the attic a tableau of shattered crates and bloodied knuckles, but the heavy threat lingered. The attaché was en route to a gala at Rideau Hall, where Allied brass mingled unaware. Resolution settled uneasily as the RCMP vans hauled the captives away under the market's sodium lamps, the night's chill seeping through Clara's coat like the war's persistent draft. Roberts arrived on scene, his stern facade softened by exhaustion, debriefing them in a cordoned alley while Ethan bandaged Liam's grazed shoulder, the trio's bonds reinforced in the forge of survival. Liam's wry grin returning as he quipped about another night out with the lads, masking the tremor of what-ifs. The conflict crested with Walker's vindication. Wired from Victoria, he confirmed the ruse, crediting Clara's decrypt as the spark that allowed his deep cover operation to net the attaché at the gala, unmasking a cell that had poisoned Pacific intel for months. 4 more carriers' worth of havoc averted, indirectly, through this northern unraveling. Japan's Midway loss now compounded by fractured espionage lines. Who was lost? Hughes perished from wounds en route to lockup, a footnote in the shadows, while the attaché faced swift deportation, his network crumbling under interrogation. Survivors bore scars. Liam's banter hid nightmares of close calls, Ethan's silences deepened by the moral gray of deception, and Clara, promoted to liaison with MI6, felt the emotional toll, a hollow victory tinged with the internment camp's injustice, where innocent Japanese Canadians paid for spies' sins. Bitter realism pervaded. Canada's Pacific vigilance had held, its radars intact and shores unbreached, but the war's cost etched indelibly, families divided, trusts shattered, the Dominion's quiet strength tested yet unbroken. Somber reflection came in the drive back to the farm, Roberts murmuring thanks to the ink-stained warriors, acknowledging the unseen sacrifices that kept the Empire's frayed edges from unraveling. As the convoy of RCMP vehicles faded into the Ottawa night, their taillights winking like distant signal flares, Clara Mackenzie leaned against the cold brick wall of the Byward Market Alley, her breath forming misty clouds in the crisp air. The weight of the evening's revelations pressed on her like the damp fog rolling off the Rideau Canal, a reminder that the war's tendrils reached even into the heart of the Dominion's capital. Major Roberts, his overcoat flapping in the breeze, clapped a hand on her shoulder, his gravelly voice cutting through the post-adrenaline hush. "You've unraveled more than a ribbon tonight, Mackenzie. Walker's double game was the key, but it's your eyes that turned it." Liam Thompson, flexing his bandaged shoulder with a wince, shot her a lopsided grin, the Quebecois spark returning to his eyes despite the graze from the attic fray. Ethan Campbell, wiping sweat from his brow with a sleeve stained by the scuffle, nodded solemnly, his maritime reserve cracking into a rare half-smile, the kind reserved for those who'd shared the foxhole's edge. Yet, as they piled into the staff car for the short drive back to the farm, the rising tension coiled anew. The attaché's arrest at Rideau Hall had yielded a briefcase of microfilm, exposing not just the Ottawa cell, but a cascade of sleeper agents from Halifax to Vancouver, each primed to disrupt Allied shipping in retaliation for Midway's inferno. Canada's stake in this shadowed war deepened with every disclosure. The Pine Tree radar chain, that string of lonely outposts blinking against the northern darkness, now stood as the front line against Japan's vengeful probes. Emotional threads pulled taut. Clara thought of her father's Halifax dock, where U-boat shadows had claimed so many, and wondered if these spies would bring that peril home. Liam lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his face, etched with worry for his RCAF brothers patrolling the Atlantic skies, while Ethan's silence spoke of kin still manning convoy escorts, their lives hanging on the intel they'd just secured. The feeling that something terrible loomed persisted, a premonition amplified by Roberts' muttered briefing. The microfilm hinted at a final gambit, a coordinated strike on Canadian ports to avenge the 4 sunken carriers, with the Yukon sabotage as mere prelude. Dawn's pale light filtered through the farm's reinforced windows the next morning, casting long shadows across the cluttered desks where teleprinters chattered like restless birds, spilling updates from Pacific Command. Clara, her auburn hair tied back with a fresh scarf to hide the disheveled remnants of the night, pored over the microfilm under a gooseneck lamp, her green eyes burning from fatigue but sharp with purpose. The major problem crystallized in stark black and white. The final gambit outlined a multi-pronged assault, submarine-launched incendiaries on Vancouver's shipyards, timed to coincide with a feigned Aleutian invasion to draw RCN destroyers north, leaving the Pacific coast exposed. Confusion swirled as Roberts convened the team, his pipe smoke curling like question marks. Noah Walker, patched in via secure line from Victoria, confirmed the attaché's confessions painted a picture of desperation. Japan's navy, gutted at Midway thanks to Clara's ribbon, now leaned on asymmetric warfare, exploiting Canada's stretched defenses, suffering etched deeper into their faces. Liam paced, his perpetual cigarette ash scattering like fallen leaves, raging about the internment camp's irony. Japanese Canadians uprooted and vilified, yet true traitors like the attaché walked free until now. "We're fighting ghosts in our own house," he spat, the hard decision gnawing at him. Push for mass arrest that could fracture wartime alliances or isolate the threats surgically, risking leaks. Ethan, sorting decrypted fragments with methodical calm, felt the agony most acutely. His cousin's HMCS Ottawa had gone down to torpedoes off distant shores, and this plot echoed that vulnerability, stirring a quiet storm of grief that made his hands tremble on the codebooks. Clara advocated for precision, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Visions of flaming docks in Halifax, where her father had once mended nets, fueled her resolve, the real fear of death now a home front specter, families huddled in blackouts, children evacuated as saboteurs struck from within. Suspense ratcheted as a fresh intercept buzzed in. Japanese I-boats sighted off Tofino, their periscopes slicing the waves like knives, probing for weaknesses in the coastal patrols. The room's air thickened with dread, bonds straining under the load. Liam's banter fell flat. Ethan's nods grew heavier, and Clara sensed the isolation of their vigil, Canada's reluctant Pacific entanglement turning every shadow into an enemy. By midday, the office thrummed with urgent activity. Clerks darting between map tables and cipher machines as Roberts coordinated with RCN brass in Esquimalt, the line crackling with static from the Rockies' interference. Clara's discovery from the microfilm, a list of safe houses stretching from Ottawa to the West Coast, each a node in the Gambit's web, propelled her into the major problem's core, a suffering that blurred the lines between analyst and operative. She volunteered for a reconnaissance run to a suspected Vancouver outpost, her Halifax grit overriding Roberts' protests. "If my ribbon started this, I'll see it through," she insisted, the emotional connections to her comrades anchoring her. Liam's protective insistence on accompanying her. Ethan's quiet packing of a concealed radio for check-ins. Why Canada? The Dominion's vast coastline, a 7,000-mile vulnerability, made it the soft underbelly of the Allied flank, its timber mills and oil refineries prizes for a cornered empire seeking to bleed the Yanks indirectly. As they boarded a military transport plane at Uplands Airfield, the engine's roar drowning out Liam's jokes, tension mounted like thunderheads over the prairies below. Paranoia seeped in during the flight. Every jolt a imagined torpedo, every cloud a Zero's wing. Liam confessed his fear of leaving Ethan behind, the maritimer's steadiness the glue of their trio, while Clara clutched a locket with her father's photo, the war's personal toll a constant ache. Landing in Vancouver's mist-shrouded harbor under cover of drizzle, they slipped into the city's wartime bustle, ration queues and ship horns masking their purpose. The feeling of impending doom intensified near the safe house, a weathered warehouse by the Fraser River docks, where Japanese-Canadian laborers toiled under watchful eyes, their internment scars a national wound. Suspense peaked as they cased the perimeter, spotting a guard with a telltale tattoo peeking from his sleeve. Yakuza Inc., a harbinger of violence. Clara's pulse raced, the hard decision crystallizing. Infiltrate now, under the cover of unloading crates, or wait for RCMP backup and risk the Gambit's activation. Real fear gripped her. Not abstract, but the visceral terror of a bullet in the rain-slicked alleys, echoing the losses that had forged her into this unlikely warrior. The climax erupted in the warehouse's cavernous gloom, where the scent of salt and sawdust hung heavy, and Clara and Liam crept through stacks of crated munitions, their footsteps muffled by the constant drip of Pacific rain through leaky roofs. The peak threat materialized as the tattooed guard rounded a corner, his flashlight beam slicing the darkness like a searchlight, catching Liam's silhouette and igniting a frenzy of shouts in clipped Japanese. Chaos consumed the space. Guards swarmed from hidden alcoves, pistols drawn, as Liam shoved Clara behind a pallet and fired his Webley. The crack echoing off metal walls and dropping one assailant in a spray of sparks from ricocheting bullets. The last chance teetered on the edge of a loading bay, where crates teetered precariously. Clara lunged for a satchel the fallen guard dropped, yanking out detonator blueprints for the port sabotage, her skirt snagging on barbed wire as she dodged a knife slash. If you're still here with her in this moment, subscribe, so their courage lives on. Ethan's voice crackled over the radio, coordinating RCMP boats closing in from the harbor, his urgent commands a lifeline amid the melee. The unexpected turn struck like lightning. Amid the gunfire, a hidden radio operator broadcast a mayday, but not to Tokyo, to an Allied frequency, revealing the warehouse as a counter-espionage trap set by Walker's network, the guards a mix of loyal Japanese-Canadian informants baiting the real spies. Revelation flooded Clara as reinforcements burst through the doors, not enemies but Mounties in plain clothes, subduing the Yakuza holdouts in a tangle of limbs and curses. Liam, bloodied but unbowed, hauled her to her feet, the explosive twist upending the peril. The final gambit was crippled before launch, the microfilm safe houses exposed as decoys to flush the ring. Yet the heavy threat lingered. The lead saboteur, a shadowy figure slipping into the rainy night toward a waiting U-boat off the coast, carrying the last activation codes for the I-boats. Resolution dawned with the arrest tallies climbing, as Vancouver Harbor Patrol sealed the exits and the RCMP netted the fleeing saboteur on a fog-bound pier, his codes yielding the I-boats' positions for swift RCN intercepts. Back in Ottawa by evening, Roberts gathered the team in the farm's briefing room, the teletype's victory clatter a symphony of relief. Clara's Vancouver run had neutralized the gambit, safeguarding ports from Vancouver to St. John and ensuring the Midway momentum held without reprisal. Who was lost? 2 guards perished in the warehouse crossfire, loyal informants whose sacrifices, like so many Japanese Canadians, would fade into classified footnotes, a bitter pill amid the internment's ongoing shame. Liam survived with stitches and stories, his grin masking the war's wear. Ethan, waiting at base, embraced them with uncharacteristic fervor, his silences now laced with gratitude. Clara endured, her promotion to field coordinator a hollow crown, the emotional consequences a tapestry of triumph and sorrow, elation at averted doom soured by the faces of uprooted families, the war's moral ambiguities etching doubt into her resolve. Bitter realism settled as they reviewed the microfilm's dregs. Canada's Pacific Shield held, its radars humming undisturbed, but the cost lingered in divided communities and sleepless nights. Somber reflection filled the room, Roberts toasting with black market scotch to "The Threads That Bind Us," honoring the unseen heroism that turned a torn ribbon into a lifeline for empires. As the first hints of morning light pierced the Vancouver fog, Clara Mackenzie stood on the rain-slicked pier, watching the RCMP boats haul the captured saboteur aboard, his defiant glare fading into the mist as handcuffs clicked shut. The warehouse raid's echoes, gunfire's sharp cracks and the thud of falling crates, still reverberated in her ears. But the immediate threat had dissolved like smoke over the Fraser River. Major Daniel Roberts, patched in from Ottawa via a crackling field radio, confirmed the intercepts. The I-boats, their positions betrayed by the seized codes, were already scattering under RCN destroyer pursuits, depth charges blooming in the Pacific depths like underwater fireworks. Liam Thompson, his shoulder bandaged and face smeared with warehouse grime, leaned against a piling, lighting a cigarette with a hand that betrayed a slight shake. "Bloody hell, Mackenzie, from a typewriter ribbon to this, you've got the devil's own luck," he said, his Quebecois lilt laced with exhaustion and relief. Ethan Campbell, arriving by patrol car from the airport with reinforcements, clasped her arm briefly, his stoic maritime features softening into something akin to pride. The trio reunited, their bonds forged tighter in the crucible of the night, a makeshift family amid the war's relentless churn. Back at the farm, the teletype would soon chronicle the full scope. Clara's initial decode had not only doomed the 4 carriers at Midway, but ignited a cascade that dismantled the spy ring, safeguarding Canada's western flank from the final gambit. The emotional consequences settled heavily. Elation at the averted catastrophe mingled with the bitter taste of losses, like the 2 informants cut down in the crossfire, their names redacted in reports to protect families already scarred by internment. Robert's voice over the radio carried a rare warmth. "Promotion for all 3. You've turned shadows into sunlight." Yet, as the sun climbed, casting golden rays on the harbor's choppy waters, Clara felt the war's somber reflection in her bones. Her father's Halifax ghost lingered, a reminder that victories were Pyrrhic, etched with the faces of uprooted Japanese Canadians whose loyalty had been weaponized against them. By noon, the team boarded a military transport back to Ottawa, the plane's droning engines lulling them into a fitful rest over the Rockies' snow-capped peaks, where the vast Canadian wilderness below seemed an indifferent witness to their nocturnal heroics. Clara sifted through the satchel's remnants in her lap. The microfilm's exposed plots now fuel for RCMP sweeps from the Maritimes to the prairies. Safe houses raided, sleeper agents vanishing into custody, their networks crumbling like the warehouse walls under gunfire. Noah Walker, the Victoria officer unmasked as a double agent, wired congratulations from his covert post, crediting Clara's intuition for amplifying his ruse and netting the Japanese attaché's entire Ottawa cell. Liam dozed fitfully, muttering about his RCAF brothers dodging flak over Europe, while Ethan stared out the window, his thoughts adrift on Atlantic convoys where his cousin's ship had met its end. The suffering of the past weeks, the attic scuffles, the midnight dashes, the gnawing fear of betrayal, had stripped them bare, revealing the raw underbelly of homefront war. Why had Canada been drawn into this Pacific vortex? Its imperial ties and geographic sprawl had made it a reluctant sentinel, its radars and listening posts the unseen sentinels against fascism's tide. But the cost was intimate, divided communities, rationed lives, and the quiet erosion of trust in neighbors. Upon landing at Uplands, Roberts met them with a staff car, his pipe clenched as he briefed the brass. The torn ribbon, now enshrined in a classified vault, symbolized not just Midway's triumph, but a broader unraveling of Axis shadows on North American soil. Emotional threads mended slowly. Clara shared a quiet moment with Ethan by the hangar, his nod conveying the depth of their shared vigilance, while Liam's returning banter lightened the load, a fragile return to normalcy. Yet the resolution carried a bitter realism. 4 carriers sunk in 5 hours had shifted the Pacific's balance, but Japan's desperation bred new monsters, and Canada's shores, though secure for now, bore the scars of vigilance, internment fences still standing, whispers of reprisals lingering like fog. In the farm's sub-basement that evening, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of fresh intercepts, the team gathered around a map table strewn with pins marking neutralized threats, the air thick with the scent of reheated coffee and Victory's faint afterglow. Major Roberts raised a tin mug in toast, his Toronto lawyer's precision giving way to gruff camaraderie, to Mackenzie's ribbon and the hands that wove it into steel. Cheers rippled, subdued by fatigue, as reports confirmed the I-boat's route. 2 sunk off Tofino, their crews captured, the others fleeing toward the Emperor's shrinking domain. Clara, her uniform mended but spirit marked, traced the map's contours, reflecting on the war's emotional toll. The elation of saving Vancouver's docks soured by the faces of the lost informants, men like her father who had toiled in silence only to be claimed by shadows. Liam, nursing his wounds with a flask passed under the table, recounted the warehouse chaos with exaggerated flair, drawing laughs that masked his deeper haunts, the close call with the garrote, the what-ifs of a bullet finding its mark. Ethan, ever the anchor, contributed little verbally, but his presence steadied them, his maritime resilience a bulwark against the grief of divided loyalties, the spy ring's exploitation of Japanese-Canadian communities, a national stain that no victory could fully wash away. The conflict's end brought somber clarity. Canada's Pacific role, born of duty and geography, had evolved from peripheral whispers to pivotal strikes, its unsung clerks and sentinels tipping scales in battles fought in code and shadow. Who survived? They all did, physically unscathed beyond bruises, but altered. Clara's green eyes now held a sharper edge, Liam's wit a thinner veil over vulnerability, Ethan's silences pregnant with unspoken burdens. Bitter realism pervaded the room. The war ground on, U-boats still prowled the Atlantic, and the Yukon radars, intact thanks to their efforts, blinked into the northern night as wary eyes against future storms. As the briefing wound down, the weight of resolution lifted slightly, replaced by the quiet rhythm of paperwork and the distant rumble of Ottawa's evening traffic filtering through ventilation shafts. Clara slipped away to her desk, the battered Underwood waiting like an old friend, its new ribbon spooling smoothly as she transcribed the final reports. Midway's carriers avenged in absentia, the spy gambit reduced to footnotes in Allied dispatches. Roberts approached, dropping a dossier stamped, "Eyes Only," commendations from Nimitz himself, acknowledging Canada's northern whisper as the decrypt's unsung catalyst. Emotional consequences lingered in the hush. Clara thought of Halifax, where blackout curtains still drew at dusk, and the families like hers forever incomplete, the war's grind a perpetual undercurrent to triumphs. Liam and Ethan joined her, the trio sharing a smoke break in the alley, the cool air carrying scents of the Rideau Canal, Liam's stories of Quebec winters lightening the mood, Ethan's rare anecdote of Nova Scotia lighthouses guiding ships home, evoking hope amid the haze. Bonds reaffirmed, they returned inside, the farm's lights a beacon in the capital's heart, symbolizing the Dominion's quiet fortitude. Somber reflection came unbidden. Sacrifices unseen had preserved the fragile peace, from Pacific atolls to prairie outposts, but the cost etched indelibly. Trust fractured, innocence lost, the human ledger unbalanced by necessity. Yet, in the surprising end, as Clara archived the microfilm under lock and key, a concealed slip of paper fluttered free. A cryptic note in Walker's hand, hinting at a dormant cell in the Arctic outposts, where German U-boats and Japanese scouts conspired in the ice floes, eyeing the Northwest Passage for a bold invasion route. Who was the ghost operative pulling strings from Resolute Bay, and what frozen betrayal awaited the next decode? As snow flurries dusted Parliament Hill that night, Clara pocketed the note, her resolve igniting anew, wondering if the ribbon's echo would lead her north into the war's uncharted chill.